Hello and welcome to another episode of Prolix Comics Bollix, the show where two middle-aged men talk at length about children's comic books. Although I think today we're actually not talking about kids' comic books.
No, I mean, it would be an interesting experiment to give this to a child and see what they make of it. I don't have one of my own, so I might snatch one off the street.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, a child or a book. Okay. So this is, we have different copies of the book, and I'll be interested, we'll talk about that actually as we go on, because yours may include different material than mine.
Well, mine is the drawn and quarterly, hang on, let me get a year for you here. Hardcover edition 2012.
Okay, and I'm dealing with the...
And it's annotated as well at the back.
Okay. Mine is the definitive Ed book. And it was published in 1992 by Vortex Comics, which was and this is the second, basically the second publisher to publish it. There had been a version that came out a couple of years before, but all of them apparently have slightly different material.
He addresses it slightly in the annotations at the back. Okay. We should mention as well, we didn't actually spell it out, just in case we have blind viewers, for example. It's Ed the Happy Clown, Chester Brown. Don't know how much you blind people are going to enjoy this comic. Do you have Braille comics? Is that possibly a thing?
I don't know. I don't know.
If you're blind and you know the answer, or even if you're sighted and know the answer, let us know.
Drop us a line. Yeah. So maybe, you know, I'll just very quickly explain my relationship to this, and then a bit about who Chester Brown is, and then I'm more interested in hearing your reflections on the book than my own, because I've read this a few times over like many years.
This is something you had lying around, right?
Yes, yeah.
I just bought the. I didn't deliberately go out of my way, but I just bought the cheapest copy I could get on Amazon, and it turned out to be this hardcover, which is a nice item. I like it. It's gonna sit proudly in my comics library, my Bollix library.
So basically, flashback to when I'm about 18 years old.
Do you want to do
19? Yeah, like the Wibbly. And I'd become friends with Ed Brisson, who didn't go to high school with me. He went to another high school in Kelowna. And he befriends me because he's heard that I draw comics, and he's wanting to publish a comic book of his own. He does that, bankrupts himself. I don't give any money to this because I have no money at all. I'm a first-year university student when all of this is happening, and I felt very guilty for years afterwards. But anyway,
what was? Hang on. What was broadly? What was? Because obviously you did provide some kind of content. What was broadly? What was in these comics? I'm kind of interested. I'm sure the viewer is interested as well.
Broadly speaking, shite.
Right. I mean, is this false modesty, or you genuinely?
No. It's embarrassingly bad. So
embarrassingly bad conceptually, or your art
in every way. In every way. I'll send you a copy. I should send you. I should do that. Do you have a copy of the collected Nicotine comics as well? Did I ever give you one of those? Okay.
Is that where Nicotine originated then?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Oh no, not in this. So this was something we called hardcore comics, which immediately created the problem of people thinking it was going to be porn and being let down and angry that it wasn't, or attempting to block us from being able to sell it. So that was a bad idea to begin with. My contribution was like an 8-page story about cool vampires.
Okay.
Who? Yeah, I don't remember much else about it.
What do cool vampires do that separates them from regular vampires?
They talk kind of street. You know, they wear leather jackets. It was awful. It was just bad.
Yeah, it does sound pretty bad. But I'm keen to. Do they exist anywhere?
Oh, I'm sure I have a copy somewhere where I could send it to you. Yeah, I'm sure I have. In fact, I'm sure at one point Ed was insulating and, Barnes with them. He had so many of them that were unsold.
Okay. Yeah, no. Send me a scan. We could even do it on Prolix.
No, thanks. And I can't remember. Ed was kind of doing something superhero-y at the beginning, but then I think it was something sort of superhero-y. So when we became friends, he was excited about some of Marvel comic stuff, and he was excited about he was reading Spawn by Todd McFarlane.
Okay. So we're talking early to mid 90s.
Early 90s, yeah, like 91, 92. And then or 93 anyway. And then so I had been reading a lot of at that point I was reading DC, because that's where a lot of the British writers that I liked had migrated, and artists had migrated to DC, either working for things like Batman, or they were doing stuff for Vertigo, which is like Sandman and things like that. So
well, here's a quick question. Sorry, I can see there's tangents coming today, but I find this interesting. So when you moved from Ireland to Canada, did you feel at all because you just said that very casually, you said, at that time I was reading DC and not specific comics, like you were keeping up to date with. Was that something, I'm guessing it must have been not only easier to do there, but a hell of a lot cheaper as well, right? Like, because I remember being interested in a lot of comics in the UK, but just being put off by the cost of keeping up with it. And that was even domestic British comics as well were kind of expensive, if I remember correctly. So was it
so this is an interesting,
to keep up with comics in North America in general, do you think?
So it's an interesting time in comic books, right? Because it was the end, really the beginning of the end of an era when I moved. So I moved in '89, and as I said, the first thing that's happening is I'm able to follow writers and artists. I'm able to follow Mike McMahon, I'm able to follow Pat Mills and John Wagner and Alan Moore. They're all doing work at this point for DC. Some of them are working for Epic, which is like the adult imprint of Marvel Comics, more, slightly more serious stuff. And I get excited about Clive Barker not long after moving, and then there's comics being published, based on, they're all terrible, but they're being published based on his stuff. And but what was interesting was you could go into any corner store, any supermarket, and they had these revolving racks that were just comics, and they were like, 90 cents, $1, so like 50p for, like shiny covered, full color.
Right.
So really cheap, but they weren't in pristine condition. They were well thumbed, they were creased. And so the whole thing of like the obsessive collector, like direct to market comics thing sold by comic book stores becoming the only way to buy comics didn't happen for a few years later. But there was a time you could get your latest issue of Batman or Superman or Green Lantern or whatever just there at the supermarket in the impulse buy section. So that's where you're with your mom and she's buying the groceries or whatever, and you're like, Mom, the new Batman's out. Can I,
Right.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to me because it's something I'd never really thought of, but I think it must have been a kind of economic imperative to why I stopped reading comics for a while, I think, because after a while, you can't really sustain yourself on Beano and Dandy and stuff like that. And that stuff is cheap as chips. But then when you start reading other stuff, I mean, there was a certain paucity of it in the UK. I mean, how many newsstand comics were there for like teens? I mean, you had 2000 AD, and you had a few other flash in the pan ones that came along and went, like Crisis and stuff. But then a lot of the other stuff was more like, you wouldn't find it in comics. You'd find it in, like you said, Forbidden Planet or Special stuff. And with so I feel as if there wasn't that, like you would have had you wouldn't be, like you said, go into a newsstand and be able to pick up like, the latest issue of, a whole range of things for reasonably cheap, and then just take them home and flip through them at your leisure. So I think if I'd have been able to do that, I think I probably would have stayed with comics like you did in a way for longer. But it just wasn't really on the cards.
But I was very monomaniacally focused on, even in Ireland, on 2000 AD. So that not only did I get the weekly comic, but then there was the monthly Best of 2000 AD monthly where they would reprint stories from like 5, 6, 10 years previous, right? Like whole runs of things. And then there was the Eagle Comics reprints in color of old 2000. So I was kind of like gap filling my understanding of the stories by going back and buying these,
Judge Dredd magazine as well.
That came actually, that was, I think, after I left. That was probably maybe right around 1989, 1990. Like it's definitely slightly after I've gone to Canada. But yeah, so anyway, we're in this weird place where like we're interested in, or at least, on the surface, we seem to be interested in this kind of more underground, like self-published kind of a thing, right? But we're still reading kind of like very mainstream, And then so we meet a couple of older hipster dudes called Rob Butts.
Cool vampires.
Yeah, they're both cool. Yeah, Rob Butts, Butz, great name, and then Dave Mayhem. His actual name was Mayhew, but he would, and his name will show up in an issue of Peep Show when we talk about Peep Show later on. He has a letter in one of the fronts. So we met these guys, and they were kind of like what do you guys fucking read? Like this stuff is terrible. So they started suggesting things like Joe Matt's Peep Show or Daniel Clowes' 8 Ball, which is all kind of around this time as well.
Right.
And Chester Brown. And so we kind of start, and this is when I first discover that in Canada, that there are these 3, there's more than that. There's Julie Doucette as well, who's in Quebec, and she's doing this comic called Dirty Plot, which is very bizarre. It's written in this broken French, Canadian English, and it's great drawings, weird stories. And Chester Brown, as I said, Joe Matt's American, but he's living in Toronto. And Seth is another one. And a lot of them are connected to this Drawn and Quarterly.
Would it be safe to say this was the northern equivalent of like that mid to late 80s independent comics boom, which was represented by a few people in that Comic Book Confidential documentary?
Yeah. So I mean, at the same time, down in the States, you have, as I said, you have Daniel Clowes, you have Peter Bagg, you have
and that Love and Rocket stuff.
Yeah, the Hernandez brothers, Gilbert, Jamie Hernandez. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. It's all this kind of and
basically cool vampire comics. It is though, isn't it?
Much. No, it's not. It is much better than that.
You know what I mean? Comics made by the cool vampires. They're like
hipster dudes with interesting kind of retro art styles and edgier, funnier, grosser kind of material. And so
I guess throwing back, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you looked into it in great detail, you'll probably find there was always something going on. But with that feel of this hasn't happened since the comics underground of the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah. It was very much a
passing off the torch, right?
From Robert and Spain and all. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so Chester Brown, as I said, he's Canadian. He comes from quite a weirdly religious background. He starts self-publishing his comics, like just hand photocopied thing called Yummy Fur, and that's where Ed the Happy Clown begins there.
Great time.
And basically, yes, and there
was a good band called the Yummy Fur as well.
Okay. Okay.
In the 90s.
And then he, I mean, just a quick part of history. So basically, he does Ed the Happy Clown. It's quite a big success. Then he goes on to do a book. He's inspired by what Joe Matt is doing. So Joe Matt, as I said, is an American but living in Canada, and they become friends. He's doing these very confessional autobiographical comics, which are really interesting now reading them as an adult compared to when I was 20 and first read them. But anyway, so Chester does this thing called the Playboy, which is all about his relationship to Playboy magazine as a teenager. And then
sorry, so the Yummy for it was an anthology comic, right? So
yes, of different stories that he did. Yes,
and they were later
it ran for some years.
Their own graphic novels,
and Ed the Happy Clown ran through it, but it was an anthology, but it was all Chester Brown.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And then he basically stopped it. He stopped. He had a final issue and was like, no more of that. And then he started doing specific story arcs, I guess, which had their own name. He would release them in 4 or whatever, however many parts, and then they get bound together into graphic novels.
Okay. I just remembered that again, another tangent, but I thought you would appreciate it. There was a Yummy for song called Plastic Cowboy, which went something, he wear Stetson, he go to disco, dance to music, 180 BPM. Remember that?
So do you think the band was named after the comic? Probably.
I'm not sure. I guess so. I always assumed that the band got their name from some sort of innuendo. I mean, Yummy for does sound like
but I assume that it probably was an innuendo. But then he was dating quite famously kind of an it couple. He's really, as I said, he's an odd guy. Just remember, he was dating Suki Lee, who was she's Canadian, but I think her parents are from Hong Kong and mainland China. She grew up in Vancouver, and she was the lead singer of a band called Bob's Your Uncle, and then she kind of parlayed that into being a Much Music VJ. We had our own like low rent Canadian version of MTV, which I quite liked actually, called Much Music, and she was a VJ on there, hosting their kind of like weirdo, like alternative rock show.
Okay.
And then she became a movie. Then she went off to work for CBC, which is basically our version of BBC, on the radio as a host, and then nearly got fired because she did this movie. The guy who directed Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Oh yes.
What's his name? Mitchell something.
John
Mitchell.
Cameron Mitchell or something like that.
His next movie was called Short Bus, and she appeared in that.
Oh really?
She appeared in that, having unsimulated sex.
Oh, okay. I've never seen Short Bus.
Rather famously, the CBC attempted to fire her because they were horrified that, because I said they're basically our BBC, and one of their, like if Jonathan Ross had suddenly gone off to make a porn.
There's still time. Oh, here we go. Suk-yin Lee, and yes, she's the main star of Short Bus. In fact, have you seen Short Bus?
No, I don't think so. But anyway, she's a really interesting person. As a gifted artist and actor and musician and all kinds of stuff. But she and he were kind of an item for a little while, and then they broke up, and he basically then gave up entirely on relationships and has been frequenting prostitutes ever since.
Right, I wanted to mention this because that's interesting.
One of his last books was a fairly lengthy exploration of his relationships with prostitutes.
Paying for it.
Yeah, Paying for it, which was originally what I was recommending we would read, and then I had this realization I really wanted to go back and reread Ed the Happy Clown, so it could come up later on.
Well, I'm
but the other thing,
going to read it because it looks quite interesting. I noticed that, and also he's got a graphic novel about Louis Riel.
Yes, that was what I was going to grab here.
Oh, you have it?
Yeah, this is brilliant.
Okay,
this is maybe one of the most important works of Canadian it's not historical fiction, it's just straight history in comic form.
Okay.
It's excellent, and it's drawn. He kind of graduated onto this very Little Orphan Annie kind of style, which is really satisfying to look at. Like he kind of, anyway, I think he was inspired by, I can't remember the artist who did Little Orphan Annie, but he very much.
I'm not familiar with Little Orphan Annie.
Mm-hmm.
Not part of my childhood.
Right. I think it's the guy who drew it is quite highly considered by other comic artists.
Sorry,
I don't know.
compose an email as we speak. I do apologize.
Real-time action.
Yeah.
So all that said,
I might
basically,
even have to pick up this phone actually as well, because this man won't stop calling. Hello?
oh, this is a job.
Good morning, Eddie. Yes, I just sent the reply now. Okay, thanks, Eddie. Bye-bye. How exciting. I think
I've seen
that happened on another pod.
I know. I was going to say, I think I've seen an episode of Septic Shock, where
I didn't get a job, but this one was the more joyous version. I did get the job.
Awesome. So back to Chess. Oh, this is a great picture from on the back of my version. This is like that's how he looked.
Wow.
When he had a lot of hair.
When he was in Judas Priest.
Yes.
Actually, I have a hairy photo of him as well, where I don't know what he looks like here, but
okay.
He looks more camp in this one.
I'm pretty sure that he has not much at all going on these days up top.
None of us do.
But anyway, so around the same time, my mate Ed bought this book, and I read it back then. Like this is as I said, back when we were first dipping our toes into this whole world of like comics not about men in spandex hugging other men in spandex.
Right.
And it was a revelation.
You were reading those comics.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Yes,
hardcore comics.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Don't
but anyhow,
drop the soap comics.
Yeah, so this was a revelation to me at the time, and then from here I would have gone on and started reading. I probably read like A Velvet Glove Cast in Iron pretty soon after, which is one of the first. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So well, but in many ways, I'll say that Chester Brown did a lot of the things that Dan Clowes did a couple of years later, sort of first.
Yeah,
I feel.
So we should probably. I mean, it's probably if people don't really know, it's kind of difficult to. I mean, you know, we can kind of show panels of artwork and stuff, and it is I do like his kind of spare style as well, which is I think you say that, but it's actually I think it's a lot more hard work to make things look that clean than it looks, right? It's that kind of effortless looking that isn't that requires quite a lot of effort, right?
Yes.
But yeah, it's very, and he mentions this in his you don't have his annotations, do you?
No.
He does pretty much mention that it is almost all, you know, when he started drawing it, he had no idea where it was going. And it was stream of consciousness.
Very stream of consciousness.
And there's even at one point he was saying he was drawing and he just didn't know what to do next. He just got up, went over to his bookshelf, looked at his collection of comics, took one down, and it was an adaptation of Frankenstein. So suddenly in the next panel, Frankenstein's monster appeared. So it's very much that, but he draws, apparently the way he draws as well is he draws specific. Yeah. He doesn't draw in sequence, right? So he can move things around.
It's utterly bizarre. I've never heard of anyone else doing this. He draws the panels on their own pieces of paper and then he arranges them later on.
Which actually makes sense though, because if he's doing the stream of consciousness thing, what happens, I think, is sometimes he's drawn something and he's totally drawn it out of the id. He doesn't think it has any connection to anything. But then later on it does. And then of course he's able to move things around smoothly. So it's like foreshadowing or callback. So, but at the time, I don't think he was, and there are a few like loose ends, right, where things just don't go anywhere. But then there's a surprising amount of things that do come round again with that sense of serendipity.
I remember reading it for the first time and reading like the story. It's quite near the beginning, but it was like, you know, the man who couldn't stop, or whatever it's called.
Oh, the guy on the toilet. Yeah.
The guy, you know. And
that's great.
And then being like, oh, that was funny and weird. And then of course he becomes a major plot point. Yeah. Later on in the story, you know.
Yeah, his asshole is some kind of gateway to
dimensional portal. Yes. To a world where they never
which
figured out
works
what to
for
do with
me a
sewage.
lot better than I didn't find the penis with the face of Ronald Reagan.
Who doesn't look anything. I also love the fact that he chooses to not make him look anything like, and also
he looks
when
more
later
like
on,
Nixon than Ronald Reagan.
yeah, and he has Brian Mulroney appear later on, who is Canada's prime minister, and he looks
Right.
nothing
Okay.
at all like not even close. Like it's deliberately,
yeah. So that worked less well for me for some reason. Like they dragged that. Like I wasn't quite sure. I don't know. It's difficult to say. It's, the idea
But
of
you know what how it works though. How it works is like there's these payoff moments though. Like there's the part where like the nurse has sex with Ed, and then you see the kind of like there's that horrifying panel of like the Ronald Reagan penis head.
Oh, and
dick,
it's all
like
sucked. Yeah.
like it's just it's so gross.
I don't know. I did certainly enjoy this comic, and I do want to go on and read those other two we mentioned for sure. But I think the difference maybe this comic caught you at the right time in life, I think. And I'm a little bit late coming to it. So
right.
I certainly enjoyed aspects of it. But when I went back to read, so like this was a pretty big deal, right, in its day. And the Comics Journal and other people went totally gaga over it. And it went to the extent of people saying things like, one of the best graphic novels ever. Oh my God, this is better than food and oxygen, you know, like, and that level of hyperbole, I think only makes sense if you read it when it was new. Like, I think it's one of those things, if you go back to it now and after everything's cooled, and it's good and it's innovative, but it ain't quite all
no, and I don't think that would have been my takeaway either. What surprised me was how funny I found it this time. I think I probably found it funny the first time, but when going through it, it's just how often I was like either just grossed out or laughing out loud at how strange. Like,
well, it's not funny if you. I can't imagine someone reading this with the sense of humor switch turned off, because otherwise it's quite depressing and grim, right?
Yeah, poor Ed, who is, I guess, our nominal main character.
Yeah, basically he's just
life.
A fucking highly traumatized
man-child of some kind.
Yeah, I don't even know what he is. I quite like the pygmies as well.
Oh yeah,
which is something he seems to regret now in retrospect, Chester Brown.
Right.
But I don't know. I'm not sure if he should. I mean, it's clearly, you know, somewhat tongue in cheek, right? I mean, it's not as if he was actually thinking these characters represent people from sub-Saharan
anything in the real world.
Yeah.
No.
So,
it's much weird for that.
No, I'm glad to have read it, because I mean, this is definitely an area of comics history and North American comics history in particular, which is a blind spot for me. Like, I know it exists, and I know bits and pieces, and I kind of know of it, like in the bigger context of things, but I haven't actually read that much of it. And some of it holds up really well. Like this holds up well. What was it? Was there a Zenith? Was it Zenith? Was that a thing? A comic called?
There was, but that was in 2000 AD.
Yeah, it's not Zenith. It's something else with a Z. It's another of this period. Like, someone lent me that stuff, and that was great. Whereas some other things probably don't quite hold up anymore.
Yeah, I would wonder how much of like Peter Bag's hate.
Yes,
I wonder how well, because that's very Seattle based in that grunge kind of. You know what I mean? Like it's really.
Right, and anything that was too over-reliant on being transgressive or shocking, like Ed the Happy Clown obviously has that in it as well, but there's something a bit more to it.
There's something innocent. There's also almost innocent about it, which is what's so strange.
It's more of an existential kind of angst rather than something specific to that time period. Yeah, whereas something else that was deliberately going out of its way to address issues of the time or in a way that was considered, I think that stuff probably wouldn't date so well.
Age well, yeah, no, for sure.
Or even stuff that was like groundbreaking because it was representing a community that you wouldn't normally, but nowadays it's like, what's it like? I haven't read much of it, but I've read a little bit of the Love and Rocket stuff, for example, and that doesn't really do it for me because I understand why it was important, but it's not necessarily a fascinating once you get over the fact that, okay, these are characters you don't normally, or you didn't normally see in comics.
Yes.
And once that's gone, it's like, oh.
I do think that I think it's Gilbert Hernandez is the brother whose draftsmanship is just superb.
Oh, so, the artwork is great. The artwork is great, yeah. But I'm talking about the content, the story content.
Yeah. But then I would recommend Birdland, which is the 4-part porno comic that Jamie Hernandez did. That's all based on kind of Mexican telenovelas, like.
Oh, okay.
And it's hard. It's completely hardcore and totally outrageous. And
cool
hilariously life affirming. Sorry, no. Sadly, it does not have any cool vampires. No, you'd think, being Mexican, but yeah, no. I do think that. So we'll delve in. That's why I said that's why one of the other kind of trinity of these people who worked for Drawn Quarterly at this time, and an interesting figure to me, partly because he completely dropped off the face of the earth, is Joe Matt, and we'll talk. As I said, I sent you, but I'd like to try to find a scan or to even buy, if I can, the graphic novel that comes before that set of comics, because he had a series of 1-page comics that were published over a number of years, which kind of do lay the groundwork for what he then does with the individual comics.
Right.
But I don't have that. So all I have is just the Peep Show.
Right.
The run of comics he did after that graphic novel.
So we've ended up talking around Ed the Happy Clown a lot more than actually about it, but that's because it's Prolix Comics Bollix, and
yes,
it does kind of speak for itself. And I would recommend getting the collected Ed the Happy Clown. But I think more than anything, this might have opened a bit of a door, and I'm quite happy to over a few more episodes be schooled by you, Nick, in stuff of this era, because like I said, it is a blind spot. Because when it comes to Prolix Comics Bollix, I'm a bit more, my choices are going to be a bit more all over the map, because I don't really have any connective tissue, and I'm discovering things for the first time. So for instance, this is a little exchange I really like. There's this panel where this, and then it goes straight into this mallet. Oh yeah, the mallet. Yes. Oh yeah, the penis surgeons I quite enjoyed.
Right.
Yeah. Although again, that's where it strays slightly into more just shock tactic.
Right. Gross out. But what's funny is and this maybe you know more about from having read the annotations, but like I didn't realize that the original Ed the Happy Clown storyline in Yummy Fur goes on quite considerably past when my book ends, and he decided that basically it was a dead end and that he didn't want to really, so he cuts it off. In the book I have, he cuts it off basically when he's kind of picked up by that woman.
Yes, it's cut off here as well, because I guess he doesn't want anything to do with
the value in what he did after that. But apparently he did go on quite a while, it sounds like.
Right.
Because I did read on Wikipedia, I read a plot synopsis of all the stuff that happens after he does go back to her house and meets her kids, and there's a whole other.
Right. Yeah, I'm guessing.
But if Chester thinks it's not worth reading, I'm assuming he's right. So.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering as well, if it hasn't been collected, it would maybe be difficult and pricey to find those things in their original form, unless someone's just scanned it and put it up online. Of course, it's also a possibility. Yeah. So I think we've run out of steam, haven't we?
Lots of fun. If you like your comics weird and gross and of a certain vintage, I guess.
Yeah, no, I would definitely I would definitely further the recommendation, even if if it's not quite the second coming that some people claimed at the time. It's definitely worth a read.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
I'll be looking forward to reading those other two, the Louis Riel. Is it Louis Riel?
Louis Riel, yeah.
And Paying for It are on my to read list. Have you read? You haven't read Paying for It, have you?
Not yet. No.
We could do that. We could do that.
Yeah. I was thinking. Well, as I said, it was actually my original first choice for something by Chester Brown, and then I thought,
we wouldn't know anything about that, so
obviously not. So it'd be good, important research for us to do.
Exactly. Just in case the need arises one day.
Sure. Yes.
See you then, Nick.
Should my wife get run over by a steamroller and I am unable to find any other outlets for my various needs. All right, let's leave it there. That's a disturbing way to finish this episode of Prolix Comics Bollix.
Yeah, until next time.
Farewell.